I know some of you will probably find this surprising, but when I was a child, I was more than a little OCD, obsessive compulsive. Done that. Okay, maybe you didn't. But my mom, if she were here today, if she were not feeling poorly, she could tell you that she very rarely, if ever, had to tell me to clean my room. Everything I owned had a place, and that's pretty much where it stayed, if not in use. Now, if I'm being totally honest, I was so OCD that on occasion I'd even attempt to clean the pig pen that was my sister's room. Right, Crystal? Although I have to say my efforts in that regard were far from appreciated. Now, some would tell you that there's a tendency toward obsessive compulsive disorder is an inherited trait. and there's much to be said for that. I, however, prefer to trace mine back to an early childhood trauma associated with today's featured toy, Tinker Toys. In fact, one of my most vivid early childhood memories involves an incident with this particular toy, although it looked more like the one you see on the screen. And they were made of wood back then. When I was very young, I had a set of Tinker Toys, as most kids my age did. And I loved to build things with the pieces that were included. I would spend hours with the wooden sticks and the wheels and the connectors that were all a part of that standard set. The problem came when some of those pieces failed to make their way back to that round can or box you saw on the screen. You see, I wasn't always OCD, and I had a habit of leaving them scattered all over the living room. That in itself is not so bad. I mean, I've got a 6-year-old. That's what kids do from time to time, right? What got me in trouble were the long wooden sticks that would somehow find their way down between the cushions of the couch and hide there, waiting for that unsuspecting person to sit down on one, thus being poked. In our house, the unsuspecting person was more often than not my dad. And I have to say, he didn't take kindly to the occasion. So one day, after sitting on and being poked by one of those errant sticks one too many times, he decided he would teach me a lesson. How many of you remember those old canister-style vacuum cleaners? Yeah, some of you are old enough. Well, this particular day, my dad got out the vacuum cleaner and proceeded to suck up every Tinker toy he could find. Well, as you can imagine, I was hysterical. Those my toys, where did they go? So after what I assumed was enough time to have learned my lesson well, my dad took apart the vacuum cleaner and showed me where my Tinker Toys had gone. In fact, they weren't gone as I imagined, just they inside the vacuum cleaner. And I have to say I learned 2 valuable lessons that day. One, that I needed to be responsible and pick up my toys, thus the OCD. And 2, I learned the mystery of how vacuum cleaners work. So, a classic since 1913, a little over 100 years. Tinker Toys were invented in Evanston, Illinois, or created in Evanston, Illinois, by 3 men: Charles Peugeot, Robert Pettit, and Gordon Tinker, thus the Tinker Toys. Peugeot was a stonemason, and he got the idea for the toys from watching kids playing with sticks and empty spools of thread, the old wooden kind. And then, so based on a series of right triangles, or right angles, the toy was marketed as one that would inspire children to use their imagination. And even though those first years things started out kind of slowly, within just a few years, more than 1 million sets of Tinker Toys were sold. And again, this was way back before Legos were ever thought of. So Tinker Toys became staples of most children's toy boxes, and thus their inclusion in our lessons from the Toy Box series. But I guess the question for us today is, what lesson or lessons does this toy hold for us as Christians? And more specifically, what lessons does it hold for us as a church? As you heard from Jeanette just a little bit ago, today is the beginning of our fall stewardship campaign, and beginning next Sunday we will have pledge cards for those of you who want to pledge. And while it is admittedly primarily about gaining pledges toward next year's budget, I hope that what you hear is that it's about much more than just monetary contributions. Yes, the money's important. It's what keeps the lights on and keeps the air working, or the heat in the summer. It's what keeps me paid, and Colin paid, and Stephen paid, and the nursery workers paid. I mean, it is important, but that's not all that stewardship involves. Yes, we need the money, we cannot operate without it, and that's just the fact of life. But stewardship, I hope you come to understand, is about much more than just the money we give. Stewardship, understood from a biblical perspective, is about giving our whole selves to God. And that includes our time and our talents as well. Thank you, Clark. When you join the church, and if you haven't joined already, well, why not? What are you waiting for? It's time to join. Each of you took a vow to uphold the church, this congregation of the United Methodist Church, by your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. And if you take a moment to think about those vows, I think they say a lot about our giving of our whole selves to God, for God to use in building God's kingdom in our world. And they remind us that each one of us, each person sitting here and those who aren't here, has something to offer. That each of us has a role to play, a piece of the whole that's needed to make this endeavor we call church actually work. And I hope you also hear that no one piece is more important than any other. As a child, I quickly learned that I needed all the pieces of my Tinker Toy set in order to make my biggest creations complete. I needed the wooden spools, the varying lengths of sticks. I needed the connectors to help hold it all together. And if any of those pieces were missing, then building what I wanted to build often proved next to impossible. Each piece was needed. And I think it's the same in the church. Paul says it best in 1 Corinthians 12 as he talks about the church as the body of Christ. Using the analogy of the human body, he talks about how each part of the body is critical for the working, the functioning, the health of the whole. Christ is just like the human body. A body is a unit and has many parts, and all the parts of the body are one body, even though they are many. Certainly the body isn't one part, but many. If the foot says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not a hand, does that mean it's really not part of the body? If the ear says, I'm not part of the body because I'm not an eye, does that mean it's not part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, what would happen to the hearing? If the whole body were an ear, what would happen to the sense of smell? But as it is, God has placed each one of the parts in the body just like God wanted. If all were one in the same body part, what would happen? If the journey of faith is to become all that God has called us to be, if we are to be about the business of making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, the stated mission statement of the United Methodist Church, then each one of us must do our part in helping build God's kingdom in and through this particular congregation of God's church, but also through the larger United Methodist Church of which we are a part. And Jeanette addressed that when she talked about our connection with giving, responsibility to the bigger church. Going back for a moment to those vows you took or take when you joined the church, I'd like to just look briefly at all the pieces that are included in what it means to be a church member, a stated disciple, follower of Jesus the Christ. I want to look for a moment at the things you promised to do as members of the church. You promised to uphold it by your prayers, your presence, your gifts, your service, and your witness. The first part is prayer, and I think that's important. Prayer is a key element of a successful church. Without prayer, no matter how hard we try or how much we give, we are doomed to failure. Karen Jones does a great job of heading up our prayer team. And if you ever wonder, that's why I hand her your written prayer requests each Sunday, because she then takes them home and sends them out to our prayer team, including those who aren't here, so that they may pray for you throughout the week. But prayer is not just the job of Karen or even the members of our prayer team. It's something we all need to be doing, especially in regards to this church and its ministry. So I guess the question is, do you pray for this church? Do you pray for me as your pastor? Do you pray for all those who serve in leadership roles of one kind or another? If not, I invite you to do so, because we need more prayers if we are to be successful disciples of Jesus Christ, if we are to make a difference in our world, if we are to transform the world in which we live. The second part is presence. Your prayers, your presence. Do you ever stop and think about how much your presence here on Sunday morning matters? It does. It matters a lot. Like Tinker Toys, when you're missing, we're incomplete. The sect, the body, is a whole. And I'd like to believe that when you're not here, you're missing something as well. And I have to tell you, for the most part, with rare exception, when you're not here, I notice, and I miss you. You know, we're still small enough as a congregation that I can look out and tell who's missing. And I worry about you. And I wonder why you aren't here. And I have to be honest, there's nothing more discouraging to me as a pastor than to look out and see a half full churches. Low attendance just kicks me in the gut. And when we have a series of those low attendance Sundays, if I'm honest, I begin to question whether or not it's because of me. And whether or not this is where I need to be. And I wonder if perhaps it's time for me to move on, that maybe perhaps you would be served by a new and different pastor leader. Thank you. But I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty at all, because, I mean, you know me, that's not my style. I don't do guilt, right? I'm simply saying that our attendance speaks to the overall health and effectiveness of our ministry together. And when it's off, I spend a lot of time soul searching about what role I'm playing in that drop in attendance. But it's not just about me. I know you can't and won't be here every Sunday. Some of you do a pretty darn good job, I have to say. But I understand that there are weeks that there are really good reasons for your absence. But I also know that that's not always the case. I also know that sometimes you just simply find something better to do. Or maybe you just want to sleep in. And I get that. There are Sundays that I just like to sleep in. But it's my job to be here, so whether you're here or not, I've got to show up. But when you do that, ask yourself this. What does your not being here for no real reason say about your commitment to this church, but more importantly, your commitment to God? And for those of you who have kids at home, what kind of example are you setting for those kids? You know, studies show us that once a child graduates from high school, it's pretty certain, like way more than 75% chance that they're not going to attend church when they move off and go away to college or to a job. Now, some of them may come back when they start having families of their own, but for the large majority, they're not going to go. If you don't make church a priority while they're young, do you think they're going to even have a chance of making it a priority when they're an adult? No, they're not. I'm a rarity. My folks didn't go to church, and I did. But I'm not normal, folks, but y'all know that, right? I'm not normal. Most kids who don't grow up attending church regularly, they will find their way back to church as adults. The next piece of those membership vows has to do with money, your gifts. And I don't like to talk about that. I don't think Jeanette liked to talk about it, did you? Maybe you like to talk about it more than I did. I don't know. You're better at that. But anyway, I don't like to talk about it. But it's an important part of whole life stewardship. And like attendance, what we give back to God, whether it's out of our scarcity or our abundance, what we give back to God is a reflection on our commitment to God and to this church. And like Jeanette told you, it's a practical matter. They're just bottom line things we have to have to keep the doors open, to keep this church going so that others like you can find a place where you feel home and you feel loved. And then like she also talked about, there's our commitment to the larger United Methodist Church, our connectional giving. It's only about $15,500 of our total budget, but that's the part we pay to the conference and to the general church. And they in turn use that money to resource us, to pay salaries, and to develop programs and curriculums that serve as resources for us as a local church. And they also use that money to do ministries all around the world. We are a connected church, meaning we are a global church. And that money we give to the United Methodist Church, our apportionments, if you will, our portion that we're supposed to give, is used for ministry here and around the world. You heard me talk about UMCOR so many times, the United Methodist Committee on Relief. Salaries for the people who run UMCOR are paid through our apportionments so that 100% of the dollars you give to aid go directly to communities like Taylor. And now we've got a group going in Corsicana, and we're just finishing up in West after that fertilizer plant explosion 2 years ago. And that's just in our conference. There's folks from the Rio, Texas conference working hard in Wimberley and South Austin, already boots on the ground, trying to make a difference for people who may not have had insurance or adequate insurance. And the other piece is service. Our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service. And that means service to the local church, and that's important, but also service through this church to the larger communities in which we live. I know some of you don't have a lot of money to give. I understand that. I've been there. But everyone has time or talents that they can share with the whole. Even if it's something as mundane as cleaning the church so that we don't have to pay for that, or doing the books, or taking care of the building, or making sure we have all the supplies we need in stock, or doing the presentation we use every week, or providing lunch for our youth on Sundays. They may not be glamorous jobs. Paul refers to them as the less presentable parts of the body. No reflection on those of you who do those. But they are necessary. They may not be glamorous, they may not be high profile, but they are necessary for the week-to-week operation of the church. And then there's something you do well. Service to others. Whether it's working with our children and our youth, leading a Bible study or a book study, reaching out to others in need through the care communities, or the Feed 5,000 in Hutto, or Breakfast with Santa and Brown Santa, or Meals on Wheels, or the Christmas Day lunch we provide for the women and children at Hope Alliance, or time spent with the residents and some of the youth at Shelley's Care Facility homes. Or those of you who volunteer and spend time working with Justice for Our Neighbors, helping our immigrant brothers and sisters find their way. There's just so many different things you as a church, as individuals of the church, are already involved in. So much good you are doing. And that is a part of your stewardship, of a life approach, a lifestyle of stewardship, a whole life stewardship. And then the last part is our witness, our prayers, our presence, our gifts, our service. And then about 8 years ago, we added our witness. Because the United Methodist Church realized that it's important that we spread the gospel, good news of Jesus the Christ to the next generation, and the one after that, and the one after that, and to all the ends of the world. And so I guess with that one, I would just ask, do you live in a way that makes others want to know more about you and your faith? Do you share your faith, whether it's in word or in deed? Do you tell others about this church? Do you invite them to come experience what you've found here? Especially if they don't have a church of their own. I don't want you going out and trying to get other people to come from other churches to our church. That's not what we're about. If they're happy where they are and they have a church home, then that's where they need to be. But there's a lot of folks out there that don't have any church. And how good a job do we do of letting them know that there's a place that we love and accept them as they are. Prayers, presence, gifts, service, witness, all parts of the vows we take when we become members of the church. And more importantly, they are all aspects of Christian stewardship, of giving our whole selves to God to be used for the making of disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Without any of these, we are incomplete. And without you, each one of you, the church, the body of Christ, is not whole, and it cannot function at its best. So won't you give your whole self to the God who loves us enough to give us a part of God's own self in Jesus the Christ? Thanks be to God for this connectedness we have to God and to each other through this place we call the church. A place where every piece is truly good.